Calamity is perhaps the most well-known mod Terraria has ever seen, and it recently received quite a big update. The Draedon update brought massive changes from the mod's previous versions, including a reworked early hard mode progression, a complete revamp of post-Moon Lord boss and weapon stats, and a new endgame challenge consisting of 3 enhanced mechanical bosses that fight you all at once. However, that's pretty far off from where I am now. I start day 1 of my adventure on a medium-sized expert mode Crimson world. Calamity grants each new player a starter bag which contains a few items to speed up early game progression. This bag also includes items to enable higher difficulties. I decided to go with Revengeance for this playthrough. Revengeance mode increases enemy stats and gives some bosses new attacks. It also adds these 2 bars called Rage and Adrenaline. Rage slowly builds up when you're near enemies or projectiles. The closer you are to these, the quicker it builds. Adrenaline builds up passively during boss fights, however loses its progress when you get hit. Once these bars are filled up, you can press a hotkey to gain a massive damage boost for a short time while the bars run down. You'll see these in action later on in the playthrough, but for now I need to get geared up. I decided that for this playthrough I would use guns only, as I found I enjoy the game more when I restrict my options in some way. I spend most of day 1 trying to break a Crimson Heart to obtain my first gun, but unfortunately this leads only to death. Through the night I start working on a elevator, hoping to find some caves for loot. Then in the morning of day 2 I build some basic NPC housing. By entering a snow cave right next to the Crimson, I was able to get underneath this Crimson Heart without encountering any tough Crimson enemies. I didn't have any gel or sticky bombs, so I had to use some smart bomb placement to break my way into it. Eventually I got through, and by the end of the second night I had obtained my first weapon, the Undertaker. Soon after, the arms dealer arrives, and I buy some musket balls from him while browsing what else he sells. Buying that mini shark would give me quite a power boost, but sadly I don't have anywhere near enough gold for it yet. On the night of day 3, I encounter the first blood moon. Hoping for a shark tooth necklace or a money trough, I block off the doors and shoot through some gaps. This is quite a foolproof way to get through an early blood moon, when I don't have the defense or firepower to take enemies head on. I spend the first half of day 4 in the desert farming for desert feathers, then shoot my way through a spider cave to obtain lots of webs. I then weave these into silk and combine them with my desert feathers to make desert prowler armor, which gives some nice stat boosts to rangers, along with spawning sandstorms rarely upon critically striking an enemy. On day 5, I flattened out the desert for an arena. I'll be able to use this a lot for the early bosses from both Vanilla and Calamity, so it's worth doing early. I do some more general exploring, and by day 6 I had saved up enough gold to buy the mini shark. With my new weapon in hand, I continue to explore the skies and caves until on day 7 the goblin army spawns. Having the mini shark definitely helps with this event. It would have taken so much longer with just the Undertaker. After defeating the goblins, I go out in search of the goblin tinkerer. Luckily he doesn't take too long to find, and after crafting Spectre boots I return to the caves for day 8 and most of day 9. The only thing worth including from these days is that I could finally make a storage system from the Magic Storage mod. This gives me a very efficient and upgradable way of storing and crafting items, ensuring I won't have to place 300 chests and crafting stations in order to play. I also craft the Opal Striker, a gun which converts bullets into opal shards. It's hard to tell which is better between this and the mini shark, although I personally prefer the mini shark as it's easier to hit faster enemies. The morning of day 10 sees me floating between sky islands. I'm mainly looking for a shiny red balloon, but grab some clouds too as they're needed for recipes later on. Calamity adds planetoids in the sky layer which contain a few gems and a life crystal, which can reduce some of the early game grind. It also adds a floating island of the alternate world evil, in this case corruption. After reaching the ocean, I teleport home and continue exploring the sky in the opposite direction. This brings me to the Sulfur Sea, an ocean biome added by Calamity filled with toxic water. Withstanding the water allows me to grab some chests on the ocean floor, one of them containing the Rusty Medallion, an accessory that causes ranged weapons to release acidic droplets from the sky. Once home, I upgrade to a blizzard in a balloon and craft a weak set of wings, the Wolfram Helipack. It's worth noting that this isn't added by the Calamity mod itself, rather it's added by the Calamities Vanities mod. The helipack is pretty useless for flying, it's mainly useful for gliding and fall damage immunity. On day 11, slime begins falling from the sky, and I start killing as many as I can to summon the King Slime. Even in Revengeance mode this is quite an easy fight. His attacks can still be mostly avoided by running in one direction. However, I think he serves as a good introduction to the boss changes made by Calamity, with it adding a floating gem which fires projectiles at you. I use the solidifier dropped by King Slime to craft shiny red balloons, a recipe added by Calamity. I then use my leftover desert feathers to craft a sandstorm in a bottle and combine a bunch of items into the bundle of balloons, one of the best accessories in pre-hard mode. After that, I build a layer of platforms over the desert, and on the morning of day 12, summon the Desert Scourge. This boss has seen quite a buff in the latest update, no longer being such a pushover with a faster dash and quicker turns. It's still a pretty easy fight, especially with the bundle of balloons to jump over the Scourge's long body. After farming the boss a few times, I use its drops to craft the Victoried Armor Set. This is slightly weaker than my Desert Prowler armor for damage output, however it really shines when in water, granting powerful buffs to most stats. I keep this on me as a utility set for when exploring underwater. On the night of day 12, I summon the Eye of Cthulhu and quickly blast through its health. The eye gains a new attack at 40% health in Revengeance mode, horizontally aligning itself with the player for a fast dash. This is pretty easy to dodge by just jumping over it or falling under the eye, however adds a nice challenge for this stage of the game. One of the changes I really like about the latest Calamity update is making all boss summons non-consumable. This allows me to fight the eye multiple times to get some extra crimtane for storage upgrades. On day 13, I travel below the desert to another biome added by Calamity, the Sunken Sea. Whilst there, I fight a mini-boss called the Giant Clam. Upon defeating him, I unlock a new NPC named Amidas, the Sea King. He doesn't really sell anything we can use at this point, so I just head home. There, I craft a watch to keep track of time, and a new gun, the Pumpler. This acts as a pretty fast gun when left-clicking, but can also shoot out an exploding pumpkin when you right-click, which is useful for an area of effect damage. Day 14 is mostly spent looking for a glowing mushroom biome. This will need access to one for a boss later on called Crabulon. On day 15, I use some of the seeds I scavenged to set up a surface mushroom biome, and leave it to spread. I then head to the underground Crimson to make an arena, and on the morning of day 16, I fight the Brain of Cthulhu. Aside from some stat buffs, the only difference I notice is a new attack in stage 3, where the brain will move in a semicircle and then dash at the player. With the drops from the brain, I craft crimtane armor and upgrade my pickaxe, allowing me to mine hellstone, which has been most of day 17 doing. While it's not very useful now, we'll definitely need it later on, and it's better to get it done just now than later. On the night of day 17, I learn the hard way that Crabulon enrages when fought on the surface, causing me to spend most of day 18 and 19 digging out an arena in the underground mushroom biome I found. I spend the rest of day 19 mining out an entire meteor, which I then use to craft a bunch of meteor shots. Since I'm fighting Crabulon underground, this is the perfect ammo to use for its ability to bounce off of walls. This works pretty well against the boss, leading to a quick victory. I end up fighting Crabulon again, partially because I really like the design of the boss, but also to obtain my next weapon, the Fungicide. I use this weapon against the next boss later that day. The Perforator Hive is a Crimson boss that feels like a mashup of the Brain of Cthulhu and the Eater of Worlds. At certain levels of health, the boss summons a worm and becomes invulnerable until the worm has been defeated. This is another boss that meteor shots work really well on, as they can pierce through multiple sections of the worm, dealing extra damage. The boss drops a new gun called the Eviscerator, however due to its very slow firing rate, it doesn't see much use in this playthrough. Defeating this boss also spawns a new ore in the world called Aerolite. On day 21, I mine a bunch of this ore and upgrade my armour, along with crafting a new shotgun which ends up being pretty weak unless you're within punching distance of the enemy. My new armour gives decent stat bonuses along with making me fall faster and releasing damaging feathers from the sky when I get hit. The next boss on my list is Queen Bee, so I head to a hive and construct a simple arena. As day breaks on day 22, I spawn the queen. This boss doesn't see many changes from the vanilla version, other than moving faster and attacking faster, and also doesn't drop anything useful, so I won't waste too much time on it. With the rest of day 22, I build a row of platforms next to the dungeon and challenge Skeletron. I really like the changes Calamity gives this boss. Usually once the hands are destroyed, this fight becomes quite boring. However, Calamity adds a new attack, where Skeletron will teleport and fire Shadow Flame bolts in a spread. It's enough to change the latter part of this fight from a mindless drone into something actually fun. I spend almost all of day 23 in the dungeon, with notable loot being the Shadow Key, Cobalt Shield and Handgun, which I upgrade to the Phoenix Blaster on day 24. I also used some of the bones I collected to upgrade my pitiful heli pack to a proper set of wings, the Skyline wings. The last Calamity update saw the addition of potions to NPC shops at various points of progression. Now that Skeletron is defeated, I can purchase Wrath and Rage potions from the Witch Doctor. One of the other mods I have, called Fargo's Mutant mod, gives permanent buffs when you have at least 30 of a potion in your inventory, which is really helpful for reducing grind. A blood moon spawns that night, and I'm lucky enough to get a shark tooth necklace. This accessory really shines when using weapons with a low damage but high fire rate, which many guns have. On day 25, I return to the Sulfur Sea and take on an event called the Acid Rain. This isn't a particularly difficult event, it just takes some time to get through. Once I have completed the event, I dive below the Sulfur Sea into Calamity's most interesting biome, at least in my opinion. The Abyss is a dangerous underwater biome that stretches all the way to the underworld. The deeper you travel into this biome, the more threatening it becomes. On the lower levels, you not only have to contend with stronger mobs, but also monitor your oxygen levels to prevent drowning under the extreme pressure. For now, I stick to the upper levels of the Abyss, scouring the seascape for shadow chests. Inside one of these is the Archerfish, a very powerful pre-hard mode gun. For most of day 26, I expand my desert arena upwards. Then on day 27, I fight Calamity's last boss before hard mode, the Slime God. This boss consists of two large slimes that behave similarly to biome mimics, and the Slime God core, which seeks refuge inside the slimes when it has taken too much damage. Each slime splits into two smaller slimes upon dying, which are much faster than the originals. After defeating the slimes, I focus on the core, which sprays projectiles at me while performing quick dashes. Eventually the core is defeated, and I use its drops to craft the Statogel armor. This armor mainly focuses on mobility, granting increased jump speed and a double jump similar to the tsunami in a bottle. I then fight the Slime God again to obtain the materials to craft the Gunk Shot, a powerful shotgun. On day 28 to 31, I do some final preparations for hard mode. First, I search the underground jungle for the Anklet of the Wind in order to upgrade my Spectre boots all the way to Frostspark. Secondly, I farm the Desert Scourge as it drops fishing information accessories, which I then upgrade to the Fish Finder. I then switch to Malice Mode to fight the Eye of Cthulhu. Malice Mode is a new difficulty in the latest Calamity update, intended as a rematch mode to allow you to get powerful boss drops. The Eye of Cthulhu drops the Counter Scarf, an accessory that grants a dash which can occasionally negate damage. After this, I craft 30 Yarum Stimulants, a powerful combination of many potions that gives a buff to many player stats. Over these days, I also do some fishing and clear a large section of the underworld for a Wall of Flesh arena, finishing it by crafting 2 obsidian insta-bridges from Fargo's Mutant mod, which create a row of obsidian platforms that span the entire world. After all this preparation, at the start of day 32 I summon the Wall of Flesh. Revengeance mode makes the wall faster, and it will perform a swift dash if the player gets too far away, releasing a large spray of projectiles. This discourages running away, making it important to keep the boss on screen and dodge the projectiles it shoots out. It gets incredibly close at the end, but after a relatively short fight I defeat the Wall of Flesh, starting hard mode. Usually, this would trigger a 3-hour grind in order to work my way through the ore tiers, then a 1-night speedrun of the mechanical bosses. However, due to the latest Calamity update, this isn't the case. Defeating the Wall of Flesh caused both Cobalt and Palladium to spawn in the world, and breaking Crimson Altars won't cause any other ores to spawn. Instead, to obtain the next tier of ores, I have to defeat one of the mechanical bosses. Before I do that, however, I'll need to get some upgrades. I start by mining Palladium and crafting the armor set, then travel to the Crimson to break some altars. While these won't spawn any ores, they do drop Souls of Light. While there, I have a rematch with the Perforator Hive, as in hard mode it drops Ichor. Using a recipe added by Fargo's Mutant mod, I convert this into Cursed Flames and craft the Cursed Capper, an upgrade to the Phoenix Blaster that inflicts Cursed Flames. On day 33 I expand my NPC hotel to house some of the new hard mode NPCs. Then traverse the underworld until I encounter another new biome, the Brimstone Crag. The enemies here drop Essence of Chaos, which I can use to make the Butcher, a shotgun that starts shooting slow, then increases in fire rate and accuracy the longer it is used. Days 34 and 35 are spent farming for various items, only some of which are useful now. I craft the Amalgamated Brain, which gives 10% increased damage and rains shade down when I am hit. And upgrade to a set of Demon Wings, which Calamity buffs to give increased damage and critical strike chance. I then travel to the Underground Hallow in search of Crystal Shards and Souls of Light, the latter of which I use to make the Cosmolite, an item that allows the player to toggle between day and night. On the night of day 35, I spawn the first of the mechanical bosses, the Twins. Revengeance mode makes the eyes switch to phase 2 at 70% health rather than 40%, along with giving them both additional attacks. Retinazer's dashes will release homing darts, while Spasmatism shoots out a spread of Shadow Flame projectiles. While they're challenging, it's only a matter of time before the Twins fall. I spend the rest of the night mining Orichalcum and turn it into an anvil, unlocking a lot of recipes in the process. I spend day 36 to 38 gathering more ore and mob drops, which I use to make the Onyx Blaster, Star Veil, Orichalcum Armor, and the Ankh Shield. By brewing Fabsol's vodka, I attract the Drunk Princess, an NPC added by Calamity which sells various drinks and candles which can buff, or in some cases debuff, the player. From her I buy Heart Reach, Life Force, and Love Potions, which I then combine with Calming and Regeneration Potions to make Cadence Potions. This potion gives the effects of its ingredients, while disabling Life Force or Regeneration from being applied. The night of day 38 sees me using all of my new upgrades against Skeletron Prime. For each arm alive, the head gains additional defense, so I start by getting rid of all of his arms. The head alone is much more manageable, however still very tanky, so it takes a while to get through its health. Next comes another mining trip, this time for titanium and adamantite. I use this to craft titanium armor and the titanium railgun, then challenge the destroyer on night 39. Unfortunately, I am defeated, so I spend day 40 and day 41 looking for life fruits in the jungle in order to increase my survivability. With my health maxed out, I begin my rematch with the destroyer on night 41. Calamity makes the destroyer take half damage from piercing projectiles, and in Revengeance mode, the destroyer shoots more lasers that inflict a variety of debuffs. The destroyer also doesn't rely on having solid tiles as much, being able to fly for a limited time. I slowly chip away at the mechanical worm until eventually it is defeated. With the drops of all 3 mech bosses obtained, I can make some powerful upgrades. This begins with the Angel Treads, a combination of the Frostspark boots and lava waders, with some extra flight time and speed thrown in. Next, I craft the Pickaxe Axe, then realise I need shark fins for the Mega Shark. This leads me to set up a teleporter system on my way to the ocean on day 42, allowing me to travel throughout my world much quicker than before. Before I farm for shark fins, however, a solar eclipse spawns on day 43. I use this opportunity to upgrade to bat wings, which give increased stats while it's night or during a solar eclipse. Using a contaminator, I purge the crimson from my ocean so that I can obtain shark fins. Waiting for sharks to spawn was taking too long, so I decided to spend even more time farming for Zerg potions, which increase spawn rates massively. These use drops from both the Slime God and Crimson Slimes to craft, but should make future grinding a lot quicker. Finally, on day 44, I obtained the 5 shark fins I needed to make the Mega Shark. After creating a new arena in the snow biome, I test out my new gun against Cryogen, an angry ice cube with an affinity for projectiles. Cryogen is intended to be fought around the same time as the mech bosses, so with my post-mech gear he isn't too challenging. While dodging the various icicles and dashes, I can't help but admire the changes made to the night sky when fighting this boss. It's almost a shame when the boss fight is over. With Cryogen defeated, I spend the morning of day 45 mining the newly spawned cryonic ore. I then search for crystal shards in the underground hallow and combine the two to make Daedalus armor and the ornate shield, which gives some defensive buffs, along with a dash when wearing Daedalus armor. After a quick fight with a wyvern, I also craft the Daedalus wings to complete the set. I then spend the next night setting up teleporters on the right side of the world, and making an arena over the Sulfur Sea for the next boss. For a lot of day 46, I was simply waiting for the Aquatic Scourge to spawn naturally, before giving up and crafting the summon item. The Aquatic Scourge is without a doubt one of my favourite bosses in Calamity. The amount of projectiles it shoots may make a lot of players think this is an unfair fight, but dodging these is just a matter of practice. The fight also doesn't last too long, which is a problem with some other bosses in Calamity. All in all, it feels like a very rewarding boss to beat, even if I can't use any of its drops. Defeating the Aquatic Scourge triggers tier 2 of the Acid Rain event, which I spend the rest of day 46 and some of day 47 clearing through. I used the rest of day 47 to build a home on my surface mushroom biome for the truffle, which I put a little bit more effort into than my NPC hotel at home. I then spend half of day 48 fighting the Wall of Flesh to get the Ranger Emblem. Due to some very unlucky RNG, it takes 7 kills to get one, which is why this took so long. Sticking to the underworld, I clear out a large space in the Brimstone Crag for my fight against the Brimstone Elemental, which I do on day 49. I really enjoyed the pacing of this boss fight. It felt like the perfect level of difficulty for this stage. There were enough projectiles to encourage learning the pattern, but not so many that it felt like overkill. I do, however, think the projectiles could get away with dealing slightly more damage, as I don't feel particularly punished for being hit other than losing my adrenaline. Nothing the boss drops is particularly useful at this moment, so I move straight on to the next boss on the list, Calamitas. Calamitas behaves similarly to Retinazer for a lot of the fight, meaning a lot of the projectiles can be dodged fairly easily. The main challenge of this boss fight is the sub-phases. In the first one, Calamitas will become invulnerable while shooting vertical and horizontal blasts at the player, which you must weave between. Having played previous versions of the mod, this came as quite a surprise, as this phase didn't exist in previous versions, so I take some hits that should have been avoided. In the second subphase, Calamitas spawns the brothers, Catastrophe and Cataclysm, which behave almost identically to the twins. Fast movement is required in this phase to dodge the many projectiles and dashes, however damage is important too, to ensure the phase doesn't last too long. With the brothers defeated, Calamitas is vulnerable once again until the third subphase. This one incorporates the grid-like blasts of subphase 1 with additional projectile explosions, making it even harder than before. After this phase, Calamitas will perform many fast dashes at the player, which can be quite hard to dodge, and in the end, it becomes an endurance battle which I win, but only barely. Just like the Brimstone Elemental, I didn't really get any upgrades from Calamitas, so I turned my attention to the jungle, where I spend the morning of day 50 creating an arena for Plantera. With a large space hollowed out and a couple of large platforms, I break the conveniently placed bulb and spawn the Flowery Menace. The first phase goes very smoothly and I get into a rhythm of dodging, however once she transitions into phase 2 I realise quickly that I don't have enough space. Plantera starts moving a lot faster, and her tentacles are too tanky to destroy before taking damage, making this first attempt unsuccessful. Learning from my mistake, I expand my arena by quite a bit and craft the portal bulb, which allows me to spawn Plantera without having to find bulbs out in the wild. I also make a blood orange, which grants me an additional 25 health upon use. With my additional preparations, I fight Plantera through the night of day 50, and once again, I lose. My third attempt is much better. I even managed to get Adrenaline in phase 2. Even with this bonus damage however, the fight still drags on. I think Plantera's tentacles need to have quite a health nerf in order to balance out this fight, as while it is doable, I believe it goes on too long and requires a bit too big of an arena. Defeating Plantera causes perennial ore to spawn, which I spend the rest of day 51 searching for and mining. The ore seems a lot rarer than in previous versions of the mod, so this takes quite some time. With this new ore comes a new armor set, although this one has a twist. The Draedon update changed the helmets of this armor from class specific to omni-class, with each having a unique niche to fill. I start by crafting the Reaver Visage, which gives increased mobility, then craft the Necklace of Vexation, an accessory that gives 20% increased damage when below half health, and causes attacks to deal Cursed Flames and Venom when wearing Reaver armor. I then decide to go ahead and craft the wings and the other two helmets, as having choice can't be a bad thing. The Reaver headgear is utility based, giving increased build speed, pick speed, and free movement in liquids. The Reaver helm is more of a tanky option, providing increased defense, damage reduction, and regeneration, however reduces damage dealt by 30%. On day 52, I return to the Abyss for some new crafting materials, which can be dropped from enemies or mined from the outcrops. This is the perfect use for the utility based helmet of the Reaver armor, making it easier for me to move through the water and mine blocks. I use these crafting materials to upgrade my Mega Shark to the Megalodon, which deals more damage and has a quicker fire rate. This isn't the only new gun I can get at this stage though. Farming in the dungeon gives me the Tactical Shotgun and Ectoplasm, which I can use to upgrade my Opal Striker from pre-hard mode into the Magna Striker. Crafting Ectoplasm into Spectre Bars also allows me to craft the Spectre Rifle and upgrade my Cursed Capper to the Ares, which grants lifesteal. To top it off, I finally craft the P90, which has an insane fire rate although low base damage. I feel there may be a little too many guns to choose from at this stage of the game, which may fit better at other stages of progression to spread out the options. Taking a break from crafting weapons, I decide to focus on accessories next. Combining 4 different shields from throughout progression with Cores of Calamity and Life Fruit gives me the Asgard's Valor, a very powerful accessory that grants a dash similar to the Shield of Cthulhu, extra health, additional defense, and immunity to both knockback and many debuffs. Day 54 sees me battling the winds of the Desert Sandstorm to summon a mini-boss. After killing 10 sand sharks, the Great Sand Shark will leap at you from the depths of the dunes. The mini-boss isn't too difficult, but gives me a really good chance to test out all of my new weapons to find which ones I like the most. I used the grand scales he drops to craft a new accessory called the Sand Shark Tooth Necklace, which increases my armor penetration by 10 and damage by 6%. On day 55, I take on one of my favourite bosses from the Calamity Mod, the Leviathan and Anahita. The fight starts with Anahita, a mermaid-like creature with water and music-themed attacks. Throughout the fight, I can't decide which gun is best. The speed of the P90 makes it easy to deal damage. The Ares is also quite useful to heal up when getting low on health, while the homing bolts from the Spectre rifle make aiming less important. Once Anahita hits 40% health, the Leviathan spawns. This giant sea monster attacks the player with a barrage of boulders and occasionally a horizontal dash. I found the best way to dodge the attacks was flying up during the boulder phase and dropping underneath the Leviathan after the dash. At 40% health, Anahita begins attacking the player once again and the two fight together. I could have got through this phase a lot quicker and take a lot less hits if I focused on Anahita first, and making that mistake almost loses me the fight. In the end, I defeat the pair and return home to check out my loot. The first thing I noticed was the Leviathan Egg, an item added by Calamities Vanities, which summons a rather cute miniature Leviathan mount when used. This appears to have infinite flight, however it's quite slow and I like the fall speed of the King Slime mount, so swap back to that. I also got a new gun called the Leviathan, which ends up being one of my favourite weapons in this playthrough. I used this on the next boss that night, Astrum Aureus. This boss behaves somewhat similarly to Crabulon, but a lot faster, running and leaping at the player to drop on top of them. Along with this, it also shoots out lasers and occasional shotgun-like blasts. With high mobility, I don't find this boss too challenging, and in fact I only take 5 hits the entire time of the fight, managing to use adrenaline 3 times by the end. Ironically, Astrum Aureus drops the Starlight Fuel Cell, a consumable which increases adrenaline damage by 15%. On day 56, I make my way through the jungle temple, disabling all the traps. Calamity changes temple generation to ensure there's a larger, rectangular-ish room in order to fight the golem. After setting up some platforms and buffs, I spawn golem and take down his first phase with relative ease. Once the head is detached however, that ease falls away. In the end, the golem proves too powerful and I am defeated. My second attempt isn't any better. Or my third. Before my fourth attempt on day 57, I switched from the movement-based helmet to the defensive one, allowing me to stay alive long enough to see more of the new attacks Golem has, including the head moving in a square around the player shooting lasers. Once the head is destroyed, the fight becomes much easier, with the body just taking some time to destroy. Luckily, the Golem drops the Picksaw, Sunstone, and the Eye of the Golem, so I won't have to fight him again anytime soon. I combine the Eye of the Golem with an Avenger emblem to make a Destroyer emblem, then buy a rifle scope from the arms dealer and combine these for the sniper scope, which increases damage and critical strike chance of guns. I return once again to the Abyss, this time to mine scoria ore using the Picksaw. I use this to craft hydrothermic armor and wings on day 58, along with a new gun called the Hellstorm. I farm the Solar Eclipse for a Moonstone, which I combine with the Sunstone from Golem to make the Celestial Stone, and again combine this with a Ranger emblem and a Core of Calamity to make the Artemis emblem, a very powerful accessory for Rangers that increases most stats. Defeating Golem unleashed a plague upon the jungle, bringing deadly new enemies that inflicted equally as deadly debuff. With these new enemies comes new materials, and on day 59 I used these materials to craft Plague Reaper armor. This gives similar stat boosts to the hydrothermic armor, but with a better set bonus. Along with 5% increased flight time and making enemies take 10% more damage when inflicted with the Plague debuff, the set bonus also gives you the ability to blind yourself when you press a hotkey. This may sound more like a downside than an advantage. if not for the fact that you deal 60% more damage and have 20% increased critical strike chance when blinded. This effect lasts 5 seconds and has a cooldown of 25 seconds, so you have to pick the right time to use it. I then craft the Honeydew, which gives defensive boosts when in the jungle, as well as 25% damage reduction against bee-like enemies, which will be especially useful against the next boss. The Plaguebringer Goliath is essentially a mechanical upgrade to the Queen Bee, featuring similar attacks and movements, but much more difficult. Along with the horizontal dashes of the Queen Bee, the Plaguebringer Goliath can also perform diagonal dashes that can be quite hard to dodge. Mobility is key in this fight, and being able to change directions quickly is essential. Once reaching 60%, the second phase begins, where the boss will release exploding mines and plague nukes that I must destroy before they destroy me. Using a combination of adrenaline and blindness, I do massive damage, however end up taking a lot of damage too as I struggle to see projectiles. After another effective use of the adrenaline blindness combo, the Goliath is left on very low health, and it only takes a little longer until it is defeated. I spend most of days 60 and 61 fighting Duke Fishron without success, before realising the boss won't give me any upgrades anyway, so on day 62 I move on to the next boss added by Calamity, the Ravager. After losing to the boss at my desert arena, I moved to my Sulfur Sea arena to get more space. I didn't realise that the amount of water would make this boss a lot easier, and when I won it felt a little like I cheated, so I fought it again at my desert arena on day 63. I found the trick with this boss was to move slowly, as getting too far would make the Ravager move a lot faster, causing an unavoidable leap. The lower health the Ravager is, the quicker it becomes, making the end of this fight quite chaotic. I still somehow manage to get adrenaline, and one final blast causes the boss to fall. From the treasure bag I get another new gun, the Realm Ravager. This is a quick firing shotgun that converts musket balls into explosive bullets. I test this out on Plantera and it does about the same damage as the Hellborn. Luckily, Plantera gives me the drop I was hoping for, the Venus Magnum. I upgrade this with some other guns and life alloy, a combination of cryogenic, perennial and scoria bars. This makes the clocked Gatling gun, which acts like the clockwork assault rifle but much faster. At this point I can also make the next health upgrade, which gives 25 extra life. To finish off day 63 I challenge the Plaguebringer Goliath again to obtain the Pestilent Defiler, a pistol which ends up being quite underwhelming. Day 64 starts with a battle against the Lunatic Cultist. I'm not exactly sure what the differences are, but this boss seems a lot harder than in vanilla, so I die on my first 2 attempts. I end up using chlorophyte bullets, as hitting the small hitbox can be difficult. The attacks seem to be a lot quicker compared to vanilla, with less time in between them and additional attacks thrown in. I only just managed to survive the fight, being under half health for the majority of it. With the Ancient Manipulator obtained, I set out to craft the Plague Hive. I have to fight the Queen Bee a few times to get the honeycomb, but eventually on day 65 I craft it. With this equipped, all my attacks will inflict the Plague debuff, which synergizes nicely with the 10% extra damage from my armour when enemies are inflicted with the Plague. On top of that, the accessory releases Plague Bees when I hit enemies or when they hit me, making my damage even higher. I also craft some Hyperius bullets, which spawn additional projectiles when hitting enemies. I spend the rest of day 65 trying to get the Martian probe to spawn, which starts a Martian invasion on day 66. One of the Martian saucers drops a Xenopopper, which Calamity adds an upgrade to using vortex fragments. This would be a good time to touch on one of my favourite changes made by Calamity, the Lunar Pillars. Instead of having to defeat the pillars for fragments, you obtain them from defeating pillar enemies. This makes them much easier to farm, especially if you need more of one specific type. With my first set of fragments, I craft the Vortex Beater, then return to the pillar for more. On day 67, I used the extra fragments I farmed to craft some exciting new weapons. Firstly, the Conclave Crossfire, an upgrade to the tactical shotgun which fires a blast from the gun and from the sky. Next, the Shroomer, an upgrade to the sniper rifle that shoots a homing mushroom. And lastly, the Vortex Popper, the aforementioned upgrade to the Xenopopper. With all these new weapons to try out, I finally get around to crafting a test dummy. The Hellstorm I crafted earlier holds up surprisingly well, with only the Vortex Popper dealing more damage per second. I decide to test these out on a real boss, so I spawn the next one in progression, Astrum Deus. My weapons do surprisingly little damage to the Astral Worm, with the fight taking a long time to get into phase 2. When the boss reaches 50% health, it will split into 2 worms and gain additional speed. Only one needs to be defeated to win the fight, but I still find my damage too low to win on the first attempt. For my second attempt, I switched to acid rounds. These inflict the plague and deal increased damage to enemies with high defense. The first part of this fight goes very smoothly, with me taking very few hits. However, it only takes a few mistakes for the boss to kill me. My third attempt on day 68 uses Hyperius bullets, which do end up dealing more damage, however unfortunately it still isn't enough to secure the victory. At this point I decide to connect a few of my arenas, with a combined one spanning all the way from my desert arena to the dungeon. This takes the rest of day 68 and some of day 69. After another few unsuccessful attempts, I change things up and attempt the Moonlord, which goes about as well as you'd expect. On day 70 I finally have a successful attempt against Astrum Deus, using the Vortex Popper with Hyperius bullets. I think the combination of practice, a larger arena, and a bit of luck were what finally made the difference. Deus drops a bunch of lunar fragments, and defeating it allows you to mine the Astral Meteor at the heart of the Astral Biome. I spend the rest of day 70 mining out the meteor, and on day 71 I use the Astral Bars from it to craft the Astral Blaster and the Deific Amulet, a combination of the Charm of Myths and Star Veil, which is a great all-round accessory for mitigating damage. I then craft Astral Armor, which along with good stat boosts gives the effects of the Spelunker, Danger Sense and Hunter Potions, along with shooting damaging stars from the sky when I critically strike enemies. In order to get the accompanying set of wings, I have to convert an area of sand into Astral Desert. This is the only biome where Hydarians will spawn, and I need their membranes as part of the recipe. These wings have great flight time and speed, and give increased movement and jump speed when wearing Astral Armor. On the morning of day 72, I begin my rematch with the Moonlord. My increased movement and defense from the new armor and wings, along with my increased survivability from the Deific Amulet, make this fight much more manageable. The Astral Beater does end up being a bit of a letdown, so I end up switching back to the Vortex Popper for much higher damage. I don't notice many changes with this fight from vanilla, other than higher health, damage, and faster attacks. After a while I get into a rhythm and manage to use Adrenaline once the core is revealed. With this, it's not long until the final vanilla boss is defeated. The Moonlord drops an item called the Celestial Onion, which I've been told tastes like fermented feet. Flavour aside, the onion grants an extra accessory slot upon use, which will be necessary against the upcoming challenges. Post-Moonlord in Calamity is much more expansive than it is in vanilla, featuring new enemies, materials, bosses and weapons. I start this stage of the game by making some accessory upgrades. With the Luminite dropped from the Moonlord, I can upgrade my boots to Seraph Tracers, an item that functions as both boots and wings in one. Combining all the lunar fragments gives Galactica singularities, which I can use to make a combined upgrade of the P90, Uzi, and Ares, called the Prideful Hunter's Planar Ripper. It takes me some time to realise it, but this gun is incredibly powerful, and won't be beaten in DPS until much further on. I also upgrade the Conclave Crossfire with some Luminite bars to make the Disseminator, then make the only summon weapon I'll use in this playthrough. You may be wondering why I'm crafting a summon weapon when this playthrough is clearly guns only. Well, that's because this is no ordinary summon. The Tactical Plague Engine consumes bullets, and for me that's enough to classify it as a gun. I spend the night of day 72 exploring a new set of sky islands that Calamity adds. After defeating the Moonlord, massive rocks containing Luminite ore will spawn, which I spend most of the night mining. I use this to craft Vortex Armor, which is among the last vanilla items I will use. On day 73 I challenged the first post-Moonlord boss, the Dragon Folly. While technically counting as a boss, this feels somewhere between a mini-boss and a full boss. This attack pattern isn't too hard to dodge, featuring similar attacks to Duke Fishron but with a red laser theme. It gets a little close at the end, but I do defeat it and claim my rewards. Inside the treasure bag is the Dynamo Stem Cells, an accessory that increases movement speed and causes ranged weapons to fire additional projectiles. Along with this is a new shotgun called Golden Eagle and the Red Lightning Container, a consumable which increases the duration of Rage Mode. I then explore some of the other changes made to the world. A new group of rock-themed enemies spawns in the Hallow and Underworld, which drop Unholy Essence. I use this to craft some healing potions and craft the next boss summon. My first few attempts against the Profaned Guardians are unsuccessful, so on day 74 I expand my Hallow arena, along with terraforming away a hill. I continue to struggle over the next few days against the spicy meatballs, so do some fishing to brew potions. Calamity adds upgrades to Wrath and Rage potions using Unholy Essence, which give a higher damage and critical strike boost along with increased mobility and making all attacks inflict holy flames. This buff seems to help, allowing me to dodge the Guardians' attacks better and deal more damage. Each of the Guardians has a different attack pattern, which makes the fight rather chaotic. Luckily they also have different health, which means I don't have to fight all three for the entire battle. The Guardians move very quickly, making it hard to keep distance, but eventually, on day 77, I destroy the last one, giving me the summon item for the next boss, Providence. Providence is unique in that she can be fought in either the Hallow or the Underworld, with each biome giving her unique attacks and drops. I decided to fight her in the Underworld first, so spend the rest of day 77 and most of day 78 carving out an arena. The Providence fight is quite a step up in difficulty from the bosses that come before, featuring dozens of projectiles that you must quickly react to avoid. It certainly is a steep learning curve, which I spend days 79 to 84 realising. I could quite consistently get her to 40% health, however at this point she spawns the Profaned Guardians, which makes the fight even more complex. Getting through this phase quickly is almost essential, as one of the Guardians heals Providence, extending the fight. After the Guardians are destroyed, Providence will perform her attacks even quicker, giving very little room for error. After over 50 attempts, I finally succeed on day 84. Since I defeated her in the Underworld, Providence drops the Elysian Aegis, which acts as an indirect upgrade to my Asgard's Valor. She also drops the Rune of Kos, which will be used to spawn the next 3 bosses. The only useful drop from the treasure bag itself is Divine Geodes, a crafting material used for the next tier of equipment. I decide to try my current build against the Stormweaver, a boss which spawns when you use the Rune of Kos in the space layer. Initially I'm confused as to why I'm dealing 0 damage, but after consulting the wiki it seems you can only damage the tail segment for the first phase. Even with this revelation I still can't defeat the boss, so on day 85 I go in search of Eulibloom ore, which spawns after Providence is defeated. I use this to craft the Blossom Pickaxe and the Spiker, a gun which shoots explosive bolts. I spend day 86 clearing out a large arena in the dungeon for upcoming bosses. Then on day 87 I return to some older bosses. Now that Providence is defeated, the Ravager, Calamitas and the Brimstone Elemental are buffed and drop a new material named Bloodstone. I found the boost given to the Ravager to be a bit too much, so instead fought Calamitas and the Brimstone Elemental, which felt much more balanced. I used this new material to craft the Claret Cannon, another gun that gives lifesteal upon hitting enemies. On day 88, I used this against the Stormweaver to increase my survivability. The additional life allows me to live long enough to defeat the boss, and I use its drops to upgrade the Megalodon into the Sea Dragon, a rapid machine gun that occasionally shoots rockets too. I spend the rest of day 88 and some of day 89 working on my dungeon arena. Then at night, I take on the Pumpkin Moon. This event is a complete cakewalk at this stage, and the only reason I'm doing it is to get some spooky wood to craft a boss summon. While there are another 2 bosses before this is needed, I craft it now to avoid having to grind for it later. Days 90 and 91 are mainly spent fighting the first dungeon-bound boss, the Ceaseless Void. This boss got a major rework in the Draedon update, and I couldn't be happier with the result. It went from one of my least favourite to one of my most favourite bosses, featuring an interesting gravitational pull mechanic that makes you rethink how you dodge. The fight is structured in waves, with each one having increased numbers of dark plasma orbs to dodge and destroy. It feels like a very rewarding boss to defeat, which unfortunately can't be said for the next one. Cygnus, Envoy of the Devourer, doesn't feel like a particularly difficult boss. Its movements and attacks are simple enough that the best strategy is simply to move unpredictably. If you want to see an example of how out of place this boss is in terms of difficulty, then I'd recommend you go watch this video by Arms, in which he defeats Cygnus as a summoner in Malice Mode, while also blindfolded. I defeat this boss on my second attempt, and the only reason it wasn't the first was because of one mistake. Not being able to put it off any longer, I fight Providence once again on days 91 to 93, this time in the Hallow. To make the next tier of armour, I need more Divine Geodes, and fighting her in the Hallow will also give me the alternate biome drop, a set of wings which I can later use to upgrade my boots even further. It takes quite a few attempts, but finally I defeat her at the start of day 93. In order to craft the armour, I also need more Eula Bloom. By nightfall of day 93 I have enough, and use this to craft the Tarragon Armor, which is more defensive and life focused than damage focused. The set bonus for the ranged helmet will cause projectiles to split into homing life energy, which pairs well with the lifesteal of the Claret Cannon. Unfortunately, the last few days of this 100 day challenge are mostly spent dying to the Poltergast, which is the next boss in progression. I tried extending my arena multiple times, tried different weapons, different buffs. I even spent some more time farming the Stormweaver for another choice of weapon. None of this seemed to help. I wish this was leading up to some heroic twist where at the end of day 100, everything falls into place and I rise from the ashes triumphant. But the Poltergast proved to be an insurmountable force, at least for the first 100 days. If you'd like to see a second part where I take on the remaining bosses, then please do like the video and consider subscribing. This video took an enormous amount of time and effort to make, so having your support could really make the difference when it comes to finding the motivation for editing another 100 days. If you watched this far into the video, then you have my sincerest appreciation. Please leave any feedback you have, positive or negative, in the comments section down below.